Thank Thank you so much for joining us today, really, for this timely and amazing panel. My name is Rosalie Nézien. I don't know if I should stand up so that everyone can see me. Voilà. My name is Rosalie Nézien. I use pronoun she and her, and I'm a program officer here at the Foundation for a Just Society. And the Foundation for a Just Society is like briefly a grant-making institution, but whose mission is to advance the right of women, girls, and non-binary people and to promote racial justice. We do that through two key pillars of work: direct grant making to amazing organization like the organization of Rose and Ngom, right? And we also do philanthropic advocacy. By philanthropic advocacy, I mean by teaming up with other foundations and allies to really influence, other funders to be better at the work that they're doing and to provide more funding, good and quality funding to organizations that we're supporting. So I'm really very pleased to welcome you all, to this panel, today. And just a word of housekeeping for bathroom. Bathroom, just back. That's through the door, and then you'll go right, or left. There are 3 bathrooms there, so you'll be able to use them. And then now I'm going to hand it over to Gunja to introduce our panelists, and then to take it away. Thank you for coming and joining us.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us both online. We have a group of people online, and then we have people in the room. So we are also going to try and do this hybrid, but in a manner that we can still have a conversation across geographies, time zones, and physical or virtual presence. So welcome everyone. It's absolutely a delight to welcome all of you to this session called Proximity Now, co-hosted by the Foundation for Just Society, the Movement for Community-Led Development, and EPIC Africa. This has been an interesting year, right? Interesting being probably a soft way of putting it. But this year, we've all had challenges. We've all talked about challenges with the current system, with how the world is moving, what's going on for a while now. What we saw this year was not just an escalation of climate disasters and conflicts and devastation around us, but we also saw that what till now was considered in many ways the lifeline to meet these, right, which was aid in all its different forms, suddenly going away. And so we have seen the devastating consequences of that play out through this year, where health centers were shuttered, schools were shut, food distribution was stopped. All of that happened across the board. And I think everybody has experienced it, where either you or your partners or your members have been calling up to say, well, what's happening in our community? The health center is out. What's happening here? We no longer have the school running. We no longer have ART treatment, all of that. I remember one of our members from Togo called us right when this started unfolding at the beginning of the year to say that we took so long. This is a community-based organization from Togo, and they were like, we are part of this community. We took so long in creating this whole trust that we had of people coming together, mobilizing, organizing. We have this health center which is there, and suddenly overnight, there is so much of anger in the community against us. Those bonds of trust, of partnership, have all been strained so heavily because people don't understand how the stroke of a pen somewhere can say that the health center is no longer functioning, that you have medicines inside but you can't distribute them, that you have doctors but they can't come and look at people, right? And so there was anger. So we've all experienced that devastation that has unfolded, the crisis that has unfolded this year. But in all of this, there is a moment of opportunity, right? And that's what we are here to talk about together today. That the reality is that our quest was never for aid. It was not about aid. Our quest was for a just, equitable, peaceful world. Aid was considered to be an instrument for that. Aid going away does not mean the end of our quest or our commitment to that just, equitable world. All it means is that there are other pathways to go to that. And hopefully, we will find pathways which are more inclusive, pathways which are less colonial, pathways which emanate from, strengthen what people want and communities want, and the resources and the strengths that they have, which our system has not done so far. So that's kind of what we're going to be speaking about today. For those of you who don't know what the movement is, and I just realized I never introduced myself in all of this. So pop quiz, who knows who I am?
John introduced you a little bit.
That is true, you did. So I am Gunjan Veda. I have the honor of serving as the Global Secretary for the Movement for Community-Led Development. The movement is a network. We describe ourselves as a majority world-led network of networks. We are a group of 3,000 local and community-based organizations, networks, and INGOs like Core Africa, who are committed to ensuring that every person has a voice and choice in decisions that affect their lives. Because we believe fundamentally that the only pathway to a just, equitable, and peaceful world is if people have that agency. It's about human dignity. It's about respecting people's agency. And the biggest challenge for this system, for us, has been that this system has not been designed to strengthen, recognize, and build on that agency. It has been designed in many ways to erode that agency, right? And so for us, we see this as an opportunity of how do we create a system? How do we create a world in which we can get to that vision? Because that has not changed for us. But we know the pathway we had till now did not lead to that. There were many problems with it. I don't think any of us wanted to see it dismantled or go away the way it was, whether it is USAID going away, whether it's the cutting of funding by different bilaterals and all the churn. I don't think any of us wanted that to happen. But many of us, for a long, long time, have been talking about the need to fundamentally change and transform the system. We've been talking about the different pathways that are available and that many of us have either been working on or have been part of or have seen happen across the world. Because this discussion of a new world and how we create it is not new. It's new at this overall level, but it's not new for many people in many parts of the world, right? And part of what's happened with this is that till last year, and I think all of us will speak to that, can relate to the fact that we always thought of how do we make this extremely unjust colonial system a little less unjust. And we found ways of doing it, whether it was locally led development, localization, or other ways, right? Where we said, well, maybe if funding went directly to local organizations, some of this would be addressed, right? Maybe if we, shifted a little bit of how we create proposals, things would change, right? And it really didn't work that well, right? And part of it was because it was a broader systemic issue. But there was almost this belief that this system is infallible. Let's just try and make it better. And now we know that's not the case because the system is collapsing around us as we sit here, right? And so how do we create that system? And what I'm hoping to do today with the wonderful speakers, panelists, conversation starters, innovators, however you like to describe it, is to share some of these ideas, some of the work that has been happening and that can lead us to that just, peaceful, equitable society that we are all striving towards. And what we are hoping to do today is that this is going to require each one of us. Yes, we can share examples. Yes, we can share data and information. But at the end of the day, it requires each of us. So what we're going to do today is, yes, we're going to start by listening to some examples, some information around what is possible, but then we're going to have a conversation, open it up, to have a conversation around how might this work, what might some of those challenges be, and what can each of us do to take this agenda forward, because it requires each one of us. And I think in signing up for this event, actually on the forum, Rose, I believe, we actually had a segment where we asked people, what are you going to do to make this happen, right? So we're going to come back to that. We're not going to let anybody off the hook, including ourselves, right? So we're going to come back to that on how are we going to make it happen? What is the role that we are going to play in this? But for now, we're going to start this conversation. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce I would say innovators here. I somehow don't like the word panelist. To me, it means like everybody else is here to listen and not the engagement. So I'm going to say innovators here, right? Idea sparkers. We have Rose Maruru, who is the co-founder and CEO of Epic Africa, and one of the co-hosts for this event, co-organizers for this. We have Sobel Aziz Nago, who is the CEO of Toaster. And we have Estoki Sazibera, who is the country director for Core Africa in Rwanda, right? And what we're hoping is that we're going to have very different perspectives on why this is an opportunity, what kind of changes is possible, what is already happening, and how can we take it forward. Whether you are an INGO, whether you're a network, whether you are a civil society organization, whether you are a funder, whether you're the government, right? What is it that we can do? Rose, I'm going to start with you, actually.
Really?
Yes, sorry, did I startle you?
Okay.
I'm going to start with you. You know, there's been all of this talk of the devastating consequences of aid, and we've all for so long been dependent on it. Obviously, it's had a lot of impact. But I know that Epic Africa and your research has actually shown that while, yes, aid has played a significant part, we all talk about it, many of our organizations have depended on it, there is very strong local resource, which makes the possibility of a just, peaceful, equitable world happen. So tell me a little bit more and tell all of us about that research and what the data is telling us, because we all love data and evidence.
So, yeah, really helping us see what's happening in the world very well. All our data helped us a lot.
So,
Yeah, thank you so much, Vivian, and thank you everybody for coming, and thank you to Rosalie Marishi and the foundation for hosting us. So what are we finding out? So let me maybe just back up a little bit. So so Epic Africa aims to just grow data and knowledge about African civil society and philanthropy and who's who, what do they do? And the motivation really came from just lived experience of myself and my co-founder, who had worked in global development, both on the continent and in various other continents, both as grant makers and as grant seekers. We met actually at probably the first African grant-making foundation, Trust Africa. And it was a really interesting place to be because we were raising money, mostly from the global north, and distributing it to local organizations. And it was just an interesting space to see the dysfunction of the whole system. And I'm exaggerating, but literally every other week, there'll be a funder or someone coming through. Do you know who's working on, Feel the Line, right? And we all know the 5 people in Dakar, organizations in Dakar. And so it's really difficult, just so the asymmetries of information, the barriers to entry if you're a new organization. How do you even meet a funder? And then they tell you that, no, they don't accept unsolicited proposals. So what am I supposed to do? And we want to somehow democratize just information. First of all, by starting to say, okay, here are all these amazing local organizations, so bringing visibility. That's sort of where we started, to just bring visibility to local organizations, which we know, again, from our lived experience, have always been there. Many of us are beneficiaries of those local, very quote unquote unstructured, informal, and all those words, whether it's raising school fees or medical bills, and we all live that reality. And so we set ourselves the ambitious, crazy task of actually beginning to map the sector. And so we've been at it since 2017. And it's been such a learning journey. And so we conduct surveys. And 2 years ago, we launched a platform where organizations can organically come and register. Again, partly for visibility purposes, but also to access resources that we share on that platform. But for us, what's even more exciting now is the next level where now we're having the data and we're beginning to unpack the data and what can we learn? And one of the most interesting and intriguing data point is about who actually funds African civil society organization. So we ask a question in all our surveys, who are your top 4 sources? I don't know why we said 4, we could have said 3 sources of funding. And back in 2017, when we first did this, after INGOs, it was individuals. And we were like, that's strange. Which individuals? That went against everything that we thought we knew. So we didn't know what to do with it, so we left it there. And then we did, in 2020, 2021, we did 2 very large surveys, each with over 1,000 respondents. Again, asking the same question. This was in the context of COVID. And again, we saw the same trend. So we really wanted to do something about it, but we didn't have the means to do it. But we're just gonna stay there. It never left us. So last year, we actually finally were able to pull out all the organizations that had indicated that funders were among their top 4 sources of funding. And then we looked at, so what areas do they work in, countries, level of work, nature of work? Was there something peculiar about them? Our expectation was that majority would be probably working on issues of, health, education, children, and that sort of humanitarian work. But we're really surprised also to see that, well, back then, we're seeing that they work on human rights. They work on gender issues, on climate change. And so we launched the report, last year in December to, again, surprise among many people, like, really? Because even I live in Senegal, and every time I'd meet a Senegalese organization, so do you raise any money from individuals? Oh, Senegalese would never give you money, they would never fund an NGO, but it's actually happening. So we think this is a really, really empowering message, and a message also that there are all these resources, but there's really no infrastructure to then help. How do you grow this? Because it's happening. How do you grow it? How do you leverage modern tools, whether it's AI or whatever? But we're seeing it. If you look, you see it. But because I think we are so conditioned, and we don't see what's in front of us because we are coming to it with a lens from somewhere else. And if it doesn't look like that, then it doesn't exist. So we couldn't see it, but it's all over. So we're really excited, planning to now begin to deepen that work because we don't know. We want to understand, how do these organizations attract individuals? Like, do they do events? Who are these individuals? Are they their friends, their relatives? Is it, membership, et cetera, to really deepen and really understand how they're doing it and what do they think they need to really leverage this? And many people have been giving examples of I know of Kenya where like every Sunday, people donate, hundreds, thousands of dollars, and these are regular people. So someone said, maybe we should become a religion. So it's not that there are no resources. So how do we talk to our fellow citizens and community members to do this? Yeah, so this is alive and well. It's happening very under the radar, but huge, I think, opportunity to lift it up. So our plea to funders and others is, in addition to funding individual organizations, it's really critical to build the field because then your dollars can go much further, right? Okay, awesome.
Thank you so much, Rose, because you spoke to a few very important things, right? The fact is that one of the challenges with the current system has been on who is collecting the data and information and what information and data is being collected, right? And we haven't looked at local philanthropy. We haven't looked at individuals. We haven't looked at community contributions and stuff because that wasn't important in that, I don't want to say current system, right? In this integrating system, right? And that is why, what Epic Africa is doing is so important, which is about how is it that people from the continent, how is it that people from the majority world collect data, which is important to them, right? For their purposes. It's not being dictated by soft power imperatives somewhere else. It's not being, dictated by funding imperatives, but it is actually what is it that we need, what information we are looking for, and how do we collect it, and how do we use it to best do what we want to do, right? Because as I think, Rose, what you said was super important, is that in the current system, we left out, disregarded completely the most important resource that we actually have, and that's people, right? People who should be at the center, who this is all about, were completely left out, people and communities. And what we saw happening instead was a focus on institutions, a focus on funders, a focus on implementers, a focus on power holders. And that's kind of also been the crisis of civil society in many ways, right? On why we are losing legitimacy, because we didn't prioritize people, we didn't see the value of people, we didn't speak to people. When we did, we spoke down to them to tell them they're racist, they are patriarchal, they don't do what they are supposed to do, right? Instead of listening and engaging. And so people turned against us, right? We've lost that. And so this, what you're saying, is so powerful because it tells us in many different ways how people are actually at the center, not just because that's what they should be from the perspective of human dignity and agency, but also from the perspective of this invaluable resources that individuals and their collectives, the communities actually have, right? And so with that, let me move to you, Estoki, to speak a little bit to this, we're talking about the power of people, the local resources, which have been ignored in the system. And I know at Core Africa, you have kind of modeled the work you do on building on the power of people, of individuals and their willingness and their ability to contribute and to work towards a better world. So tell us a little bit about that, the power of volunteerism of individuals, and also any lessons, because I'm sure it's not easy.
Thank you so much. First of all, I start by thanking you for the opportunity to convene with a group of wonderful people. Maybe to talk, I'll talk a little bit about Core Africa, because maybe most of you don't know about it. So Core Africa was founded in 2011 by a former Peace Corps volunteer who served in Morocco, but later on started, we call it a movement in Africa. Currently, we're in 11 countries, and I come from Rwanda, where I'm a country director. It's a community-led, but youth-led organization. Reason I say youth-led is because of the asset that we saw that was underutilized. The number one asset the continent has is the youth. More than 60% of our population are youth, but you would see them just redundant where they are after school, unemployed, and yet they can do better things, empowering the communities and so on. So when she founded Core Africa, her emphasis was on the youth that are university graduates, most of them unemployed after school, deployed into very poor communities just to go and facilitate community-led development. So but before we deploy them, of course, we empower them with the tools to be good listeners, good facilitators, people who have empathy, who are humble, because as you know, young graduates think they have it all. So if you send them into rural, poor places, they might think they have, they're above everybody. Yeah. But when we empower them, they're able to actually go and be humble and start working with the communities. How do they do that? First of all, is to integrate into a community and make sure you are fully part and parcel of the community you are going to support. Once they are deployed, they do so many things. Integration is from the little things they do with the community, such as dancing or singing or go to farming with them. Although they are university graduates, they are not scared to be dirty, to put their hands into dirt. So they go to farms, they go to fetch water with the community members. If there is a child who is sick, they are with the people, the community members who take the child to the hospital. They are part and parcel of the community, and therefore they are able to create a kind of bonds of friendship that bring trust from the community members. From the trust, they are able to actually start, conversations with the communities they support, and therefore, the community members feel free to talk about anything. Let's say if they have a need in the community, they're able to talk to them, and then the volunteers will facilitate ways to actually generate ideas on how to better, develop themselves. And that's a sure way to have, sustainable development. Because if the people own it, led by the youth, as I told you, that our number one assets in the continent, and Liz is here, our founder and CEO. She's the one who came up with that such a great, we call it movement, because we see the transformation it's making, not only to the community we support, but even to the young people who, when they come to us, have no experience at all. They are not able to get jobs they aspire to have because they have no experience. But after the service, because they serve for 1 year, they're able to have real life experience that makes them very competitive on the job market. So I think that's what I want to do.
Thank you, Stokie. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, but before I move to Isabel, I want you to recognize we have people online, and feel free to introduce yourselves to each other. But if you have questions, reflections that are coming up, because after a couple of interventions and thoughts with innovators here, we are actually going to come and open it up for a general conversation. So please do feel free to put that in chat. I have colleagues who are monitoring that chat and who will make sure that your reflections, questions are all brought into the room. Again, we're going to try and make this hybrid thing as equitable as we are able to in the circumstances, right? So, Belle, I'm going to move to you and, shift gears a little bit. So, we're talking about what are the different pathways towards creating that equitable, just, peaceful world and society, right? And part of it was the resources. Rose and Stokie both spoke to, the resources which are prevalent and which we often ignore. But we have seen either with COVID-19, in the current situation, where communities have been the first responders in crises, right? Stokie was just before we started telling me this lovely example from Rwanda, where they actually had 11,000 people, 11,600 volunteer for 145 position. And so that is the level of wanting to be a part of the change, right, which is there. But that's one aspect of the system that we have. There are other parts to it. And let's move a little bit to that. So, Belle, I've heard you talk about, this whole thing on how the current system is designed from a spending perspective, right? We are so focused on service delivery. We are so focused on doing the here and now. We don't build the infrastructure for what is needed for that peaceful, just society. And so what happens is we are continuously dependent on an inflow of cash because it's expenditure, and to do expenditure, you need money, right? And it's all there. But that's drying up. We're seeing that, at least from the traditional sources. So, Sabel, tell us a little bit more about this idea of, moving from expenditure to investment.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. So I'm Sobela Zingom, and I'm the very new CEO of Tostan. First thing, and I want to echo on what Ostochi mentioned about the youth, because that's my background. So before to lead Tostan, I've been a youth-led organization for years in the continent and championing youth empowerment. And I cannot say more, and even if I'm not wearing my youth hat anymore since I turned 35, that was also a reason for me to quit my previous position, because I think that so many people talk on behalf of young people in Africa specifically. And I've been frustrated for the 15 years that I've been leading organization of youth to be tell what we do or to be represented by people that was not young people. But I commit myself that the day I turn 35, I pass to something else. And I'm very happy because I'm continuing on something that is close to my heart too. And whatever you can do in Africa, you have to deal with 70% of the population that is under 35. So youth are still part of it. And I just want to say that you're absolutely right. And the power that I see when we put young people in a position where they can show how useful and impactful they can be to the society, they also change the the way the society look at them. Because today, the society look at young people as a problem. There is a demographic dividend. We cannot manage it. We need to find jobs to them. We need to feed them. We need to educate them. We need to. But the truth is, we cannot do that if they are not playing a part of this education, of this job creation. And the truth is, there will never been that high number of young people that are highly educated, highly competent in Africa than today. So they have to be part of that change. So that said, leading those youth organizations also being always in a very, it has been hard because when you lead a youth organization, people don't trust you a lot. So they give you small money because you have small funds. So I can see now the difference with leading Tostan, which is a 35 years organization with a lot of experiences, credibility, and reserve, instead of the organization that I created that has to live month by month, year by year, with no specific. And what I've always, interrogate myself on this was, why should we spend all that money that fast? It's like, okay, we're gonna take a risk. That's happened a few years ago. We're gonna take a risk. We're gonna give you $8 million. And we never gave $8 million to a youth-led organization. But you need to spend it in 4 years. Okay? What we do, we want that $8 million. So we create a non-feasible program and plan of spending the money. And when we are there, we figure out that spending and impacting are not going to the same speed. What should we do? If we want to focus on impacting, we're going to take more time, but we're going to lose the attention of our funder, which can cause a non-continuity. If we're spending, because at some point, they are sometimes more looking on spending than impact, if we spend it the right way. And so I was like, there is a problem. There is a serious problem in the way the ecosystem is asking us to deliver a program and change. And I was starting to think, okay, now what if we think differently in the way that we spend so that we invest in something that can be more sustainable than the spending. Simple element. Instead of renting cars or buses, buy buses and use them for the time that you need them and build a social venture that rent them so that they can pay the functioning of those buses, because the funder won't give you money to entertain the bus. So you buy the bus, but when the bus has a problem, you cannot fix it. And that's why you see in many projects, you see big buses with big logos or big machine with big logos that are not functioning because it wasn't planned. And so we started to think that way and see how can we, instead of just spending the money, trying where we can to invest it in a way that can serve the impact, but also serve the organizations to be more sustainable. Now coming to Tostan, which is another reality. Observing the different assets, the different reserves, the different so and so, I'm thinking about, okay, our fund manager, which is an amazing person, tell Sobel, this fund, we don't have to touch it, it has to survive 100 years. I said, okay, you're right. But at the same time, I feel that there is things that we need to do now with that funding, because those investments will allow us to impact 400 years. That funds alone will not allow us to impact with 100 years. So those are, I think, reflections that are very important for organizations to have more and to be more in a position to negotiate with funder, because investing doesn't mean impacting less. For me, it means impacting more in a more autonomous way and in a timing that goes above the timing of the contract that you receive for a funder. And I think it could make a huge difference. And that situation really grow that reality and reflection, because there is less money to do the same amount of things. So now I feel, and my board is more open for us to discuss about spending. Giving you a simple and concrete example, we have a training center in Chess. We pay $5,000 a month for energy. We decided $5,000 a month. So we decided that we're gonna invest $200,050 to make it all solar, so we have independent. But those 250, which funder is going to give us that money if it's just to equip our center? So some might, but very few. But the thing is, like this money, we decided actually that we're gonna make a loan to our own fund, keep charging the bill of electricity for 3 years, and then take all that money that we will place in an account to pay back that 200 and 500 to, yeah. Thank you, Rose. You might get that English is not my first language, right? So those are concrete examples of things that we can do that can help us to be more sustainable in the approach of doing things by being more audacious also. You know, renting an office in Senegal for 2 years equal buying a land and build something. You know, for 2 years. In Guinea-Bissau, we pay $50,000 a year for renting our office. In 2 years, it's $100,000. $100,000, build a land and build, at least if it's not 10 rooms, it's gonna be 4 rooms. But it's enough to start. And this is also how I think we need to think more as, I would say, as business in the way we optimize our spending, but with a social responsibility that will allow us to keep driving our social purpose.
Thank you, Sabel. So what Sabel was saying was so important because so much of our emphasis is in the here and now, spending here and now. But we know that assistance is going down, aid is going down. Many of us are talking about the world where we want it to go down. We don't want to be independent, you know. But how are we building towards that? Because what we are currently doing is going to just require more and more and more resources and the spending. So how do we think on how do we invest what is there so that this work continues even when this money is no longer available? Now, I'm in this weird position wherein I am facilitating the conversation, but I'm also supposed to be sharing from the movement's perspective of what this looks like. So I'm going to now change hats for a second, share a little bit of our vision of that, and then come back and have our wonderful innovators here speak more to different aspects of it and illustrate it because their work actually does that, right? So from the movement perspective, you know, we're the movement for community-led development, so we are very clear. Community is at the center. And speaking of investment, the biggest investment we can make is in communities. Because at the end of the day, the just, equitable, peaceful world happens when communities are resilient, right? So what is required in order for communities to be resilient? And that requires different parts of the community, whether they are individuals, the community leaders who are parts of it, and in the community there are different people there, right? There are men, women, there's youth, there are religious leaders. We all bear so many identities in a community. But then there are the social entrepreneurs that are there, right? And then we have local governments who are present around that table. We have civil society representatives. So there is a role for each one of us, but what is the role that we are playing? And we need to rethink that very radically to do this. Because the way we view this like a human body. Every organ has a very important part to play. You need the kidneys to do what they do best. You need the pancreas to do, you need that. But if everybody thought, look, everybody just talks about the heart, right? So we should all be doing what the heart does, we would have a crisis. And yet, if any of those organs are not there, for the most part, we are going to also have a crisis, right? And so how is it that we re-examine what is it that we are doing? For local governments, for philanthropy, for civil society, what are the roles that we are playing? So we very firmly believe, speaking again to something that's well raised, and a lot of what Core Africa does, it's not about service delivery. People are always going to need electricity, water, health facilities, education. That's not going to stop. If civil society takes on the job of providing that to people, the need for funding is only going to keep increasing. It's not decreasing because people are going to need that and populations are going up. We know that, right? But that's the mandate of elected governments, right? So our role as civil society perhaps is not that service delivery. It is about how do we enable those elected governments to provide those services to their people. And that requires changes in the international financial architecture, those big picture things. That requires changes in and capacity strengthening for local governments many times. And I know Massimo is here from Local 2030, and I hope in the discussion you'll bring that in also on how that is happening, right? But that's perhaps the role of civil society. And then mobilizing and facilitating community agency, right? Those volunteers, the resources which are there in community, and seeing how can they create these sustainable models. So for us, that is the role that we see for civil society, is how do we strengthen that government-citizen compact? How do we enable that? How do we make sure that different players, and how do we support philanthropy and other actors to be a part of this? And to strengthen that, to invest in this, so that in 10 years' time, in 5 years' time, whatever horizon we are setting for ourselves, we are able to have these local environments, this human body, which is functional without life support systems, which aid has been so far, right? Because we can't continue to be on life support. But I'm going to now go back to my facilitator hat and come back to our innovators here to speak a little more to these different visions that we've, and the different aspects to this, and how do we actually operationalize more of it. So Rose, you told us what the data is saying. There is a tremendous opportunity. There are resources that we have overlooked. Tell us a little bit of what do you think, based on this data and your work across Africa and what you're seeing, on how do we move towards that vision? What is the possibility? What is needed?
Wow, big question. So for us, data is actually an enabler, right? So first of all, what's happening. So we need to know that, and we haven't for a long time, and we still don't know half of it. So we need, and it's the learning that then can come from that data that we're really after. So that's one big piece. So when you talk about infrastructure to enable this kind of change that we want. So just to give you an example, in government, because of history of civil society on the continent, etc., doesn't always like us, particularly if you're talking about issues of governance and those sorts of holding them accountable, which is asking them to do what they're supposed to do. They don't like that. But we believe that the lack of visibility and evidence of what difference we're making makes it harder for us to make the case of why we should exist. And so we believe that data can be really helpful. Obviously, if the government wants to crack down, they will do it. It doesn't matter how much knowledge you have, etc. But we think it strengthens our case. And in this way, one, we dream of a day when, for example, when we have big data, we can be able to say, in Senegal, this sector employs X number of people, because we're never able to say that. We create jobs, actually. We employ, and because of the situation that Sobel was describing, oftentimes we're the employers of, fresh graduates, because we can't afford, experts, right? So we're creating and training the next generation of leaders in this space. So being able to say, Mr. Minister of Finance, the reason why we should not be paying taxes as non-profits is because, listen, we're providing livelihoods for, you do the math, right? Number two, if it wasn't for this sector, again, we'd love to be in that position to say, if it wasn't for this sector and its work, much as we shouldn't be delivering services, but nevertheless, because government is not everywhere, there are people being left behind, and we can't say, oh, it's not our job. So, but we get stuck with it. So, if it wasn't for, the work of this sector, X number of children who are your responsibility would not be accessing education, et cetera, et cetera. And we think that that can begin to change the conversation, or to say also like, listen, we buy goods and services. I mean, there are moments in Dakar when you can't find a hotel room. Who's meeting? It's mostly people from some development people, right? So we buy goods and services. No one has done that research to say, what's the contribution actually of this sector to the hotel industry in Senegal? When tourists stopped coming since 2008, actually, the people who occupy those hotels are mostly have to do with our work, right?
Yeah.
Last week there was the food conference, food systems conference.
3,000 people?
Something like that. No one is counting that. So we think to be able to come to the table with that kind of argument might give us a mileage in terms of government then creating the enabling environment for us to operate. In Senegal, it's very easy to register a business. There's even a special office. You come 48 hours, you can register a business. Try registering a nonprofit. It's going to take you 2 years, and it's really expensive.
Yeah.
And then every 2 years, you have to file the, comment il s'appelle? a plan of investment, and then you have to. It's really, really difficult. So that's how also we look at data and how you can begin perhaps to change some of the situation the relationship that is there between us and government, and our government should be subsidizing or paying. That's another source of income. If you're delivering services, you're running schools, health, our government should be financed. I mean, but for some reason, it's funny because there's a time that CSOs were like, no, but we can't take government money. But we take American government money, we take European government money. Like, what's wrong with the Kenyan government money? They're all corrupt anyway, right? Anyway. So I think you can really begin to change the conversation and begin to also change just the image and the narrative about our sector, and also to begin to make these connections between good governance and economic development. And if you're going to do well in business, you do well in business because there's ease of doing business, right? So there's a relationship. But who are the institutions that are making those arguments? So when we talk about infrastructure, it's also having like the think tanks, or who's generating this knowledge and writing these white papers and making the advocacy, and that ecosystem is still very fragmented and rather weak, and kind of zero investment in it. So I think there has to be that has to exist to be able, even who's advising us, maybe like Torsten, because of history, is able to access resources. We can get an advisor, like a financial advisor. Most organizations can't afford that sort of service. So where are those institutions that can provide that sort of advisory to the sector? Yeah.
Thank you, Rose. So, you started off with this very important thing on how do we make that happen. And as you said, one huge thing is the tension in that government-civil society relationship. And data can be a huge enabler to address that relationship thing. But I think what I heard from you was this can go broader than that. This can, help us make a case with the governments, right, and others. I'm going to move to you, Estoki, to again speak to one aspect of you've talked about when you were in our conversations, how there are actually government resources available in many countries, and we often don't know, and communities don't know about it. And part of this new envisioning is how do we actually work together to see that those resources are spent for what they should be spent? Tell us a little more about that.
Thank you. That's a good question. In Co-Africa, we encourage the volunteers to find a way to work with the local government at the local level. Usually working with the government at the senior level is not that easy, but once you're in the communities, because the local leadership are community members. And in most African countries, they are not elected people who are paid. They're usually volunteers, but they have programs that they oversee that usually have a fund, to it. So when we're training our volunteers to be ready to go into communities. We usually find a way to invite government officials to come and present to the volunteers the government policies and programs that are supporting community-led development. So information is key and it's power. Usually you'll find out that the community members don't actually know such programs exist. So with our university graduates, once they have the information, they take it down to the people. And once, as I told you, we train them with facilitation skills, they're able to discuss with the people Tell them actually for such issues that you have, there is money sitting somewhere at the local leadership level that is not being used. Number one, the money can be sitting in a place for like years. Nobody knows it's there. It will go back to the government coffers. But once the volunteers go, facilitate, talk, discuss about the needs and potential solutions, they are able to organize the community members. And then once the government sees that actually the community is organized and they are able to do few projects in a cost-effective way, they are able to actually give the money to the community members. I can give you an example of something called, maybe if I talk about Rwanda, we're in many countries, as I said, and I know the model we use in Rwanda, the government, the local leadership model is similar to Ghana, for example. We learned it from Ghana, so our local leadership is modeled to the Ghana one. So the government has a program called Village Project. So that's money, even me, I didn't know it existed. But once we brought in government officials to come and train the volunteers, we came to know that such money are there. So now our people are able to tap into that locally available resources to do some of the projects they need to do. The other type of resources that we tap into is what my colleague here, Rose, spoke about, the individual kind of local money, the local fund that people might think are not enough, but when put together, they make a big difference. I can give you an example of the kind of projects our volunteers use to implement with the people. Liz remembers, we use, because as part of a volunteer's budget, we have some money we put aside for the projects. We used to fund livestock projects because across Africa, our people are farmers. All they need is to get manure for their farms. So you go to a village and they will tell you, what we need? We need a pig, we need a goat, we need this and that. So we used to fund such projects like in big numbers. But today, because of they are learning to know that their development has to come from their own. They have to own the process. Today, they do savings towards implementing such projects, and that's where I come back to you. So the local philanthropy is coming to life with Co-Africa volunteers because of the way those kids, those young people are able to facilitate their communities. Local philanthropy is key, and we're able to tap into it. Most of our projects actually are implemented using the people's money. So they would save for a purpose. Let's say we want to buy maybe chicken for each household. They would put money aside to do that. If they want to buy any other thing, they would put money. So they begin to understand that it's their own development has to come from them, not from any other person. The other resources that the volunteers are able to tap into is to try to map out any other partner who is around in the communities where they serve. By mapping out any partner who is there, they're able to actually go with their community members and start the discussion. Today, they are able to link community members with existing microfinances, for example. That allows them, if they want to do, let's say, a small business, to have more capital. So it's about synergies and tapping into any existing resource around where the volunteers are.
Thank you, Sergey. So we talked a little bit about resources, right? And what you were talking about in Rwanda. I've heard this just actually last week from colleagues in Zambia, that Zambia also, they have community development funds. And again, they were never used, even though they're there, because communities didn't know how to, about them. So what you're talking about, both from the perspective of, what are these resources? How do we know them, right? But from the data perspective, but also from planning is so important. But that's not enough, Sobel. You and I had a conversation when you talked about, well, all of that is fantastic. We need all of it. But we do have a fundamental problem. And that's going back to, what are we as civil society doing and how are we doing it, right? So part of it was the service delivery, what we are doing point. But part of it is also very simply about what is it that, are our organization structures fit for purpose, right? are our organization structures designed to do what we want to do? Or are they actually just legacies or things that we have taken on? And there is a challenge there, right? So Sabelle, if you can speak to
Yeah.
that. I also want to just say one thing. I've
Speak
just
that
been
way.
informed,
Yeah.
speak that way, because
Yeah,
that's
the
how
mic is
people
there.
see you.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and I think it's yeah, you know, it's part of the things that emerging back to our face when we are in a turbulent situations like we are today. It has been very weird to see. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I started a venture, and my first budget was $50,000. So to serve young people. The structure of a structure the structure of an organization managing $50,000 is light, it's functional, it's simple. People are not like under contract and so on. It's very flexible. You do things fast, you and so on and so on. And the more you grow, the more complex you have to change your structure. Not because you want to, not because it's good, because it's act by the one giving you the money. The one giving you the money asking you more and more conditions to serve the risk. So you need more and more people in your finance team, budget control, and so on and so on. And then you pass from a team where you have 15 people working in program and 2 people supporting to a team that you have 20 people working supporting, 10 people in programs. And so your structure is feeding more all the, I won't say non-essential, but not purposeful activities than what your purpose asks you to do or lead you to be doing. And I think this is a real problem in what we do, because sometimes it's half of the money that going to all those support costs in what we do. And I really question what for when we think of the future, I think we will be in a situation where we will need some choices and some sacrifices between our organization sustainability and our ability to reach our purposes. And both are not always aligned. And that's the problem. And when you can choose to serve, and at a certain moment, that's what leaders, responsible leaders will do, they will choose to save their organization and the people working for them, because they have family, because they're engaged, because of many social and economical reasons, and do less in terms of program. But if we choose to focus our energy to our purpose, that means that we need to change the way our organization is functioning and being more audacious and taking more risk. I will give you a simple example, and I will take the example of the volunteering. That's allow me also to say that I'm very happy that I knew that we will be here, and there is a lot of conversation that I want to have also with Core Africa regarding to this. Today, when I arrived as a new CEO, I asked, okay, about the story of the organization. People told me that when Tostan started 35 years ago, most of our facilitators were people that never gone to school, that were between the age of 18 to 25, okay? That did not write French, that did not write English, and so on. And they have been the best over the 35 years. But when the organization started to be bigger, the control needed to be bigger, the organization needed to have report read in French from the community. The organization started to hire people that was graduated to send them to the villages. And those people did not take it as a great opportunity to live in a village for 3 years to serve people. I have a diploma. I want a car, a suit, and an office. And so this was a 9-to-5 job. And then the structure of the organization has to change because the HR policy is asking for people to do X, Y, Z. And then we were doing the same thing for the same reason, but our structural choices was based on what would be acceptable for the one giving us the money and what not would be more impactful for our purpose. And this is where I think there is strong reflections that we are having today on should we go back to what we were doing? Because first, they were volunteer. There were no staff. Maybe they were challenging that we can fix today. But if everybody says that during that time, they were the best facilitator, they lived really with the community, they was committed, they were engaged, and so on. And today, yeah, they are just doing the job, they are not that engaged, they have family to feed, they cannot do that at 40 years old, and so on. And we keep pushing that way because we are asking to have some sort of contract and so on. So I think the orientation and the direction that we have to take from funders sometime, and sometimes it's not even for funders, it's from us. Because of our fear to not be funded, that we take the highest level of standards to guarantee maximizing our chance to be funded. And I think this is also something that in our current situation, we need to feel comfortable to challenge and to try differently to come back with what have worked the best for the lowest cost and that have been the most sustainable, and to take and to create new frames to manage that situations that are maybe I was telling my colleagues, AI today maybe did not exist 50 years, 35 years ago. But today, if you do your report in Alpular, AI will translate to you in French. So the facilitator still doesn't have to speak French to do the report. But, and so how can we rethink the way we do through also what is accessible today as technology, as, knowledge that we have and so on.
Thank you so much, Sabal. And this is something which I completely relate to because MCLD started in 2015 as a movement, right? We were a movement. And then there were all these demands coming to us in 2021, and we realized as a movement, we are not able to sustain it. We need some structure. And we had to figure out the structure. And that was precisely the dilemma. It was like, okay, if we want to be funded, we need a certain kind of structure because that's what people understand, right? I remember a conversation actually in 2020 with USAID, where we were part of a co-creation where, where they told us the team loved our idea. They were like, yours is the most popular idea, and we are never going to be able to fund it.
Yeah.
Because yours
That's a beautiful sentence, right?
we're never going to be able to fund it, right? And I will say that changed because they did fund that structure and that 2 years later. So that did change. But it was a very tough conversation because a year and a half we had a conversation around, okay, so how is it that we can be true to our values, be a movement, and yet have some kind of a structure and fundable? But that led to conversations on, is this the only kind of organization structure that's possible? Are there other ways of organizing? What is a sound structure and who determines that, right? Is it fit for purpose? Is that what is the definition of a sound structure? Or is it the fact that we will continue to be funded or have money for the next 100 years? And we came up with a structure that we feel, we describe ourselves now as a movement organization. So we came up with a structure we think is fit for purpose. And it's terrifying, right? It's really, really terrifying because you don't know when we started off, we found funders who supported us, who believed us, but we didn't know if this would happen. So it is a constant dilemma because you feel like, oh, but this work that we are doing, we all believe the work we're doing is super important, right? That's why we do it. So like, but what we're doing is so important that if we don't get funding to do that work, so we need funding because we want to continue that work. And yet, in trying to get that funding, are we doing what we want to do? Well, with that, you've heard a lot from us, talking about the possibilities and stuff. We want to open this up, the conversation, to understand a little bit of what, if anyone online or here has questions, but also reflections. Are there things that you are thinking about along these lines or different lines? Are there challenges that you see in this, right? So in the room, we can just raise hands. Online, I know my colleagues are monitoring. If you have people online, if you have reflections, you want to speak, maybe John, you can let me know.
Yeah, so there's been chat on the chat. People really loved the point several people made about civil society not undermining local democracy by pushing them out of the way. So there was like, that was
Okay,
a lot of the chat messages were seconding that motion.
fantastic. That's good to hear. So,
And
We have a question, yeah.
hold them to account, that was the.
hold on to your hand. Fantastic. So,
I'm just like, can you just like put your points, I don't know, on like a PowerPoint for all of us to read at all times, every day? But I think that I had two reflections. I think,
can I ask you to just?
sorry, yes, my name is Jean. I'm co-CEO of Accountability Lab. We are a global translocal network, so we're 12 locally registered, locally funded, locally often all things organizations that essentially are bound by a single cooperative agreement and sort of mission vision. We have an office in Washington. I am co-CEO of that team. I am not the boss of all the others. The only thing we do is essentially bring a lot of the information together and work on proximity, which I think is one of the big challenges that many organizations face, is because, you know, when you're talking about scale, when you're talking about all these sorts of things or impact, people are like, well, you should be at the UN. And I was like, well, that would be lovely, but I have a green passport and I can't get to the UN because I won't get a visa. I'm South African. But I think that one of the things that, so I think looking at structure for many, many years, that was a very weird structure for many organizations to look at, or funders, and they were like, I don't get it. So am I funding? Who am I funding? Why am I funding that? Do I fund you? Is that important? I think that, so a lot of the connective tissue work, I think, is important, and I think we often forget that. And I think the other point I wanted to make is, we put, as civil society, and we had this conversation this morning, so many self-imposed accountability measures on ourselves so that we can get funded. And I'm not saying that they're not important, but I sometimes think we've taken them to the absolute 150th degree. So for example, we received a USAID grant. Firstly, they did a year's worth of due diligence on us. They did not do a year's worth of due diligence on some other nice other funded organizations, but we got a year. And then eventually they said, great, so we're now going to monitor you a lot, and these are the 50 things you need to do. And I said, okay, fine, but why? One of the things was, I need a signed thing of every person that attends your workshop with their name, surname, telephone number, ID number, and signature. And I was like, but we're working in Zimbabwe, is that a good idea? Like, what are we gonna do with that paper? Do you need that paper? Who needs that paper? And now I'm gonna tell a whole lot of people that, like, these are the people that came to my workshop, and we're already in a government that is not particularly friendly. And they were like, well, because that's how we're gonna know that people came to the workshop. And I was like, yeah, but can we take a photograph? Or yes, but then who's taking the photograph? I was like, well, can someone from USAID do a drive-by? Like, do they want to just walk in and just take a picture and then we know? Would you trust them? And they're like, yeah, I suppose there's no actual reason why we do that. And I was like, well, so can I undo that policy? Is there something else we can do? And I think it's those things. But it's going to ask us, it's not that we don't want to be accountable. I think it's just that we spend so much time creating rules for our own accountability that we need to continue to, which are expensive and require staff now to manage this form. And I think that this issue of like an ops team following another team is important. And I wonder how we continue to do that. How do we force our donors to help us think through what is critical for them to give us money, and what can maybe be flexible a little bit more.
Okay, I am going to request whoever is coming in to be a little bit concise in your interventions and how you describe the work you do. If you could just introduce yourself with name and organization name at this point, because we do want to get people in. But we also have, speaking of accountability, an accountability exercise that we want to close with. So we want to, keep time for the accountability exercise, right? Maria, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Maria. I work for Habitat for Humanity, a very large housing organization. We have a footprint in 60 or so countries. They are all national level organizations, very autonomous. We're very large in the US, and the way we fund ourselves in the US is through very small donations, 10 to $100. From a very, very widespread net. So it's, yeah, I just thought it was, given the conversation, it was good to mention how we fund ourselves. We mostly build houses, we also do volunteering, we also do advocacy, and we also have a microfinance, a housing microfinance branch. We do a ton of stuff. My question specifically is about terms. And I am very curious about the use of the term philanthropy and the use of the word voluntarism or volunteering in this context, because in my mind, they are very minority world. And I've been parsing through your book, which I find fascinating, and I found there a very nuanced distinction between community-driven development and community-led development. You were saying these are very different things. So you are very strict with words. So my question is mostly about the terms. Are they African terms? Do they mean anything? Do you use other words? Are they good words?
Thank you. I'm gonna take one or two more, and then we'll come back to it together. If there are any. Is there anything online? Are there questions or comments online? Rosalie?
No. Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much. Really informative. Again, I'm Rosalie Nesien, and I work here at the Foundation for a Just Society, and we are a private family foundation. So depending on one person, one founder, that's where the sources of funding is coming from. When you were speaking, I had several reflections as you were all speaking, but like to keep it short, when you were talking about the fact that, organizations need to do a better job of like negotiating, the pace of like spending with funders and the reserve. I'm like, and I saw myself in that, I'm like, okay, yeah, our own practices. And then I'm thinking, especially for private foundation, sometimes it's like we work with organizations, the paperwork, for folks who are familiar with the US context, if an organization doesn't have equivalency determination or those organization 501c3, it's like you have to find ways like to support them. And then our own due diligence, it's like we find ways to support them, but at the end of the day, we do need to report. So it's problematic, I agree. But I'm like, if you could elaborate a little bit, like for you for negotiating, is it for negotiating to make like, a time limit even longer, or should we even change the way we fund? It's like funders should be investing in reserve, there should be like endowing organization. I'm like thinking about those things, but wanting to know from you, what do you mean by the negotiation? And then Rose, yeah, I'm like really always blown away by the research, the data and everything. But I'm like wondering whether you can talk a little bit about some of the, the challenges, the challenges when you talk about data being an enabler. Is it really an enabler for all of the organization? Like the caveat, are there caveats? Because I'm like thinking about some of the organizations that we are working with, who also really have like difficulty in terms of like raising funding locally because, of who they are and what they do. Yeah, thank you so much. Really informative. And I can but agree with you if we could get the talking point of everyone. Really, really helpful.
Fantastic. So we have a question for Rose. We have a question for you. I think your question was directed at me. Do anybody else wants to? If you were talking broadly.
I think Rose and
Okay.
for Africa.
Okay, for Africa. All right. If there are no more interventions or questions or reflections, we're gonna head back. Yeah, Massimo.
It's not really a question, but more of a reflection, if I may. I'm Massimo Perino from the Local 2030 Coalition. We are a UN platform of SDG localization. So we definitely see SDG localization being very much linked to community-led development. And really our goal is to, within the UN system, each agency, whether it's UN Women, UNEP, UN Habitat, WHO, everyone's working on local level matters, but in a different manner. So our idea is to really have like more coherence and coordination on working with the local level. Just maybe not really a question, but from our side, one of the tools that we work on that we think could be interesting related to this discussion, but maybe it could also be construed as kind of another condition for funding. It's a UN tool, so it's within UN funding mechanisms, but basically, if there are projects that are funded by the UN, not all, because there are different funding mechanisms, but one of the funding mechanisms that we work with specifically related to SDG projects, we've developed a localization marker, we call it, which is basically a tool which kind of not really mandates, but it encourages UN agencies that when they're looking to fund projects, that they work with local stakeholders within those projects. So it could be either by consulting national associations of civil society, of local governments, women's groups. So not really, I guess, like a condition post, but more before, but maybe something that can be interesting to the discussion to think about. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Sobel, Rose, and Stoke, and I'm going to ask each of you to respond to the questions or any final reflections you have, but to do that in 2 minutes each, right?
In 2 minutes, huh?
Yeah, 2 minutes each, because after this, we do want to get into an accountability exercise, but we do have an opportunity, at least for people in the room, we're going to have an hour together here, right? To be able to speak to them, pick their brains, get all you want from what they're saying, you know, the words. For people online, I do want to say that, you know, if you again have any questions or comments, please do put it online, put it there in chat, and my colleagues are monitoring it. So I'm going to start with Sobel, and then Rose, and then Esther.
Okay, we'll go fast on your point on the terms, because I think this is very important. Just giving an example, in the global war, we talk about volunteerism. In Senegal and in French, we have volunteer and we have bénévole, which is always a confusion between who is what, who is getting a stipend, who is not getting anything at all, who is under contract, who is not under contract. So I think those are very important things to clarify sometimes. And some other time we use terms that don't fit with anything, but that are global, and we have to, for example, when we talk about business plan, you know, a business plan, I've been following young entrepreneurs dealing with business plan without knowing what they would do, you know, but they're asking to be an entrepreneur, you have to do a business plan. And so they're paying people to do their business plan for them because they need to have a business plan. So that's part of the, you know, things that we do. And we incorporate sometimes without really understanding or leading them. On your question, I would just give an example, Rosalie. Okay, let's say that I have, my daughter is 18 years old. She needs to go to the university. I don't have enough money to bring her to the university. I know you, Rosalie, you're someone that believes in education for girls. Okay, I'm coming asking you money for my daughter to go to university. You can decide what would be the condition you will give me. Your condition could be, okay, I give you the money, and I want, when she got her diploma, you send me her diploma. That could be one option, right? That would be a proof that she went to school and she get the diploma. You could also say, every day, I want the copy of the list of presents of every student in her class. And I want to control that every day she went to class. It's your right to ask that. So in between, you ask the parents a lot of logistic with the university, bringing a paper and so on and so on. And in the other place, you trust the parents that have more willing than you and than anyone else that her daughter to get successful in school. What is it about? It's about trust. And this is what is missing from my perspective in this system where we operate like agents professionals. But when someone stand up and said, I want to end violence in my neighbor, it's not just because he's a nice person. Probably he suffered of that, he's witnessing of that. So there is a real engagement to do the change. And today we professionalize it so much that finally that's become the priority. And when I say negotiate, it's refinding where the trust needs to be in a place where that affect the less, all the extra effort that needs to be done just to prove that you're gonna do what you said you're gonna do. And you have to explain that to people that don't really trust you. Because people that trust you, if you tell them, this is what I'm gonna do, they will listen to you and they will say, okay, so when it's done, show me what you have done. And I think we're missing of trust for the right reason. I think people did not good things with money until the system, but the system is punishing the majority because of the bêtises, I don't know the English for that, of a minority.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I think you took my minute.
Merci.
Okay, I think I heard two things. There's the question about language and community-led, locally led, and there's a whole contention about philanthropy and volunteerism. So in terms of philanthropy, that's a problem, has been a problematic word in our context. And many people now preferring to talk about, because philanthropy somehow it's the ones who have giving the ones who don't, rather than this reciprocal kind of relationship, which is more in the tradition of where most of us come from. So we think in terms of solidarity, and I don't give you because I have more, I give you because you need it. So if we have to divide this piece of bread, because you're hungry, we'll do that. So I'm not giving you what after I've eaten and I'm full, then I can give you what's left over. So solidarity, generosity, and that's those sort of sentiments are really what drive a lot of, I was going to say African philanthropy. We have to find another line, but that giving and support of each other, and just a sense of you are because, each was like Ubuntu, you are because, I am because you are. And that recognition of that connection as human beings, and what we started this conversation with, it's about dignity, right? It's about human, it's about justice, it's about why are we here on this earth, right? It's those fundamental questions, and how do we live with each other? So I'm not giving also because I'm good, I'm a better person than you, because I know sometimes it can be quite transactional, because I expect that tomorrow when I have a need, you'll be there. Yeah, so there's something around that. Then Rosalie, you asked about the challenges with the data. Well, the first big challenge is, of course, availability, because unlike places like in this country where our nonprofits have to submit some information, financial information, and that's enforced. If you don't, then you suffer some consequences. And therefore, groups who are sort of infrastructure organizations, the candidates and all of these other groups, that's public information. So anybody can have it and splice and dice and say whatever you want to say. But in our situation, there are no central repositories of data. So we have to collect data at a retail. It's just not sustainable. So, I mean, the hundreds of thousands we estimate, of nonprofits on the continent. And if you're going to do this organically, it's so really thinking of ways to acquire the data. And one source of data is funders. I mean, they collect, they have all the data. And Susan and I we started a little something, right? We need to follow up, right? Like, can funders donate that data, privacy notwithstanding? Because organizations that you funded are vetted already. Well, a problematic one, right? But if, funders could donate, particularly those that receive, do calls for proposals. I remember someone saying that their most recent call for proposals, there were over 2,000 applications. I'm like, what do you, after you fund the 5, what do you do with the rest of the data? Do you trash it, or donate it to us? We serve the sector. Then there's of course a question that access to, because we collect, we do this online, and of course we understand the inequities therein. The smaller frontline organizations that are not really sophisticated. Many of them don't even have, their digital footprint is like close to zero. So we are very aware that we are excluding many organizations, and again, trying to figure out how do we not, how do we become more inclusive? And then, of course, there's the question of privacy, data security, particularly for groups that could be endangered by being on a platform. So we never display you cannot be searchable, you have to give us permission. You have to give us your consent to be searchable, to be in the public facing part of, yeah, so that's.
Thank you. Esther Case.
Sorry.
Yeah,
for
thank
your
you.
time.
No, it's okay. I'll do 1 minute. So maybe I'll talk about volunteerism. Although my colleagues explained it well, I wouldn't even add more to what they said. I'll just maybe share a quote from our CEO, but it's from Mahatma Gandhi. That's something she loves. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. I love that because that shapes our volunteerism program. Just in 2 words, I would say volunteering is serving others, just donating your time, sacrificing your time to do good to other people. While you are doing that, you're also learning. So that's when you actually recognize who you are and you find yourself through doing that. If I remember well, you say that it's kind of minimum. Not many people are joining volunteerism, right?
It's quite big, yeah.
It's big, okay,
Yeah.
very good. Yeah, just the 2 words, serving others while finding yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We did have a question online, and I know I said we have an accountability exercise. We have exactly 5 minutes. But I also recognize people online don't have the opportunity that people in the room have to speak to our innovators. So I am going to quickly go into that. But before that, just a couple of things. One, Maria referred to a book, so just to tell people, the book she was referring to was this, which I don't think people can see online, but perhaps people in the room can see.
Stand up and they'll see.
Where to buy it?
Sorry.
Where to buy it?
Where to buy it? Well, there is a link which we can put in chat, and here John can tell you where to buy it and how to buy it. But the book Maria mentioned, and I'll bring it up because this was about how do we have people who are doing community-led development already, and we talked about it, because there are alternate ways of doing things, and those are happening. How are they doing it in the voices of people who are doing it, whose voices are not heard because publishing houses have quality control measures. We talked about trust, and we talked about control and accountability, right? And then this was a case where we were like, yeah, but these are all PhDs in life. Does that count? Because they asked us, are your authors PhDs? So I just wanted to flag that since you mentioned the book, and people might be like, what book that is? And to your question around accountability and things, also to mention that there are organizations and movements like Africans Rising and others, we do it, which are actually talking of partnership charters. And these are where instead of somebody imposing on the other, how do we agree on what are the most important parameters of partnership and do that? You know, to Sobel's point of how do we, instead of it being an everyday thing, how do we understand what your need is and then offer to you, this is what makes sense in our context, and see how do we meet there. And that's partnership, right? That's not going beyond, that's not moving. Okay, what we're going to do is ask Sobel, the question is for you. So I'm going to come to you. I'm going to ask you to be exactly what, and this time I will cut you short.
You will cut me.
But in the meantime, for people in the room, there are going to be Post-its that if we can, Nelly is going to just share these Post-its with everybody. And people online, you have to chat. The accountability exercise that we all do is we all go to these meetings, we listen to things, right? We hear a lot, there are things we are like, aha moments, great, wonderful. We go back, we get back into the business of our everyday lives, forgotten. When you started this, when you registered for this event, we asked you, what is the commitment? What are you going to do to take this forward? We're going to ask that question again. What is it that you're going to, having been part of this conversation, your time is valuable, everybody's time is valuable, you invested in this. What are you going to do about this? Anything that you have heard, right? What is the commitment? What is it that you are going to do? individually, organizationally, doesn't matter. If you're online, put it in chat. If you're in the room, put it on a post-it note, and we'll have the post-it notes there so that later on we have an idea of what it is. And we do this as an accountability exercise so that we are not just sitting and talking, but we are actually seeing what is the action we want to go to from.
You have to sign it?
Well, great, if you're willing to take accountability and put your name to it,
You in the chat have
fantastic.
to be accountable, but we don't.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Yes, so we should put our names to have that equality across virtual and in person. So thank you for that, Susan.
Sorry.
And while everybody does that, Sobel, I'm going to give you a minute to your question, and that is, what kind of pushback have you gotten from funders to these more creative, sustainable, business-minded ideas that you were talking about, the investment and stuff? So.
No, I think there is no specific pushback that you get. The thing is, like, they are not able to do that. That's the thing, you know. They don't know where they will justify that, okay, instead of funding learning activities or this or that, they said, equipping your building, that's not something that we could do. So it's more not fitting into a very rigid structure that already exists, even though the same funders asking you about your sustainability plan. You know, on what every project asks you your sustainability plan. But at the same time, your sustainability plan needs to be, yeah, you know.
Don't use the dollar past
exactly.
the
So it's
as long as someone else is paying for that sustainability.
exactly, but not them. Exactly that. So yeah. 1 minute.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for this conversation, for being part of it. You're not off the hook. We are still not going to let you off the hook till you finish the accountability exercise. But once we are done with that, I think people online will have, a discussion.
We'll have our own little conversation.
So they'll have their own little conversations, and people in the room here will have a little bit conversation. We are sorry, we tried to be as equitable as possible. We do have some snacks here, which we will not be able to share with folks online. So apologize for that. But I think one of the things we want to really deeply think about, right, and what we are hearing is that there's a lot that has been going on, and we haven't focused on that. We haven't thought about it, partially because of a system where the gaze was on certain things because certain people were dictating what was there, right? Money was power in that. But also that there is a moment of opportunity. There are examples, there are practices, there are learnings that we can have from each other around these things. But a lot of it comes down to our belief in human dignity, our willingness to trust, our willingness to listen and not just always be the ones telling people what to do and how, and our belief that together we can find a way. So maybe accountability, I have these things that I need to be accountable for people because it's their money. Maybe you have restrictions. If we are conversing and we have the same values, we can find ways. And sometimes it requires, well, I think you mentioned crazy ideas, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it requires being crazy, and sometimes it requires us to stand in solidarity and listen and trust in those crazy ideas, because that's the only way change happens and transformation happens. If it's something that sounds like we've heard this before, probably it's been tried, probably it's not worked, right? Maybe what we need is something crazy to shake it all up. And maybe that crazy can be something as simple as going back to a fundamental belief in people, in their capacities, in their agency, and our power together as individuals, but also as a collective, whether it's civil society, whether it's community, to be able to make change if we are willing to be together in solidarity. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying online. I'm going to put in my headphones, and if you I'd love to hear your thoughts from all your dedicated listening. Let's see. So now, for the first time, you're free to just open your mic and say something. I'd love to hear from you. Or you can just keep putting it in chat. The chat has been burning up at the last few minutes. Thank you for all your additions. We will be posting the recording, in the next day or so. So do please tune in to mcld.org, and we'll also send out an email to people who had registered, letting them know where they can see it and direct people to it. Ash, boy, we got the first half of the alphabet here. No, Rebecca and Sylvia, anything any of you want to say in reflection amongst ourselves? You're all muted. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here holding it down for the later letters in the alphabet. No, I really love the session. My agency is in a bit of an odd place to be able to make commitments. So I've just been thinking about what my thinking about what my personal commitment is. I think that as long as I am able, I want to just keep championing these ideas, right? The idea of community ownership, right? But like radical community ownership, right? Making sure that, we're being accessible, we're transferring resources directly to people to manage them, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Yeah, I love the thinking about transferring ownership more to local organizations, right? Owning land versus renting it. So I thought that there were some really exciting ideas here. So yeah, thanks. Glad to join.
Cool. Thanks, Rebecca. Anyone else?
Yes, thanks for this session. Actually, my concern has always been we have the SDGs as a global commitment, but with local impact. And yet, I constantly witness the local participation paradox. I mean, how can we have the SDGs achieved with impact when the beneficiaries are not participating in its delivery?
Right.
So I'm saying yes, I think just to borrow the words, to champion an evidence-based advocacy, that will unlock the local participation paradox in SDG localization. We just have 5 years away.
Yes. No, that's a brilliant observation. We've been fighting, back in 1993, the Human Development Report called for 20% of development funding to go directly to local communities. There were a number of big countries that really attacked the UNDP for saying that, but it still holds. There's got to be more devolution. There's got to be a fair share of resources in the hands of local communities. And so like at least 20% of the national budget needs to be in the hands of local people. And if you look at the minority world, the rich countries, that's how they work. So 40% of all public resources in the US are in the hands of local communities. I think the highest level, Nigeria just committed to 20%, which is a big leap. I know Zambia just increased by a factor of 10 a couple of years ago the allocation of national resources to the local rural districts. And this is makes such a difference. It made such a huge difference in Kenya. So I really agree with you, Sylvia. It's like people can mobilize, they can contribute, but they also need to ensure that in the national budget, a fair share of it is going to local communities. Anyone else have anything to say, or we're all just eager to get on with the rest of our evening? Anyone? I think I know most of you. Carrie, I don't know you. Who are you and who are you with? You're muted. Okay. Well,
Hi, John.
yes, Sylvia.
Would you be able, I wanted a connection to the UN gentleman. He was
Yes.
talking about some dot. I need
Yes,
the
I
data.
will. I have your email, so I will connect you with him, Massimo, from Local 2030. You can go to the local2030.org website, and they have a lot of great stuff that they really just became a UN. They've been around for a while, but the UN just made them a priority just only 2 years ago. They have a very tiny staff, but they're very committed to localizing the SDGs. And
Okay, I did list, but most of the data is at district level. I really wanted it as local as. So I wanted to have a look at that tool that he was talking about and then really see how.
Oh, good. I will. Anyway, I have your email, and I will connect you and Massimo so you can connect on this.
And what was the name? Do you know?
His name is Massimo. He's one of the staff based in Spain. Their headquarters is in Bilbao, although he grew up here in New York City but moved to Spain.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else before we close? Anyone? Okay, well, thank you all for attending and for listening and for the comments that you put in the chat. We've saved the chat, we've saved the recording, and we're, from our side, and I know the other people here are very committed to strengthening the ecosystem for locally led development, and together we can do it. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your morning, evening, night. I mean, I know some people had to leave early because they were in Nairobi and it was way late there. Okay, everybody, thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.